All right, good afternoon. Packed house today. I'm so glad you were able to find a seat. Welcome to round 2 of our faculty workshop this semester. I hope that yesterday was informative and valuable to you. I'm glad you were able to make it out today. I need everybody to introduce themselves. I'm Dr. Roper, of course, Director of the Writing Center. These are my wonderful assistants, Ariana and Krishandra. They are the best grad students on campus, just so you know. And yes, sir, tell us your name again.
Yes, James Thompson, Ed Leadership.
I'm Jennifer Warren. I'm a clinical supervisor in BSD.
Great, so glad to have both of you. I was saying yesterday, it's wonderful to have a nice range of departments represented and disciplines represented, because really these workshops are all about the relevance of writing in various disciplines. And so I'm glad that you all were able to make it out. So I want to just begin with reminding us of some of the things that we talked about yesterday. The whole presentation yesterday was meant for us to begin thinking about writing in a very particular way, which I'm going to talk a little bit more about today. So yesterday, we said that it's important that we first of all recognize the value of writing and that we help students learn how to be deep readers. I think that more often than not, when students come in here with writing assignments, a lot of what we talk about is the reading that they've done prior to the writing moment, right? And so getting them to think a little bit deeper about the subjects that they are engaging with is really important. And then how we can create assignments that force critical thinking. And that's really what I want to talk a little bit more about today. In today's workshop, we need to understand the connection between thinking and writing. We need to look more closely at assignments that will prompt students' critical thinking. And we want to develop strategies for teaching how your discipline uses evidence to support claims. Again, the idea is, how are you? The idea is the way in which students engage with writing within particular contexts. And I think that's really where the thinking part of it also comes in. We also want to address briefly today as well some common concerns that professors have, particularly professors who are outside of the discipline of English and writing. They often think that integrating writing will take time away from the content of the course, that writing assignments are not appropriate for certain disciplines, that assigning writing will bury the teacher in paper grading, and that assigning writing requires specialized expertise. So we'll look at some of those misconceptions a little bit later in the presentation today. But I first want to talk about the connection between writing and critical thinking. It has to do with a constructivist view of knowledge that demands critical thinking rather than memorization. So this really goes back to sort of your philosophy of education, right? This view sees knowledge as something that is discovered rather than dispensed. And it's sort of counter to a very traditionalist approach to education, but it is one that is quite common and I think very modern and contemporary for our times. A dualistic view sees knowledge as the acquisition of correct information and right answers. This view sees students as empty buckets being filled with data from the all-knowing professors. To dualists, the only academic use of writing is to demonstrate one's knowledge of correct facts. And the emphasis becomes, how well did the student repeat back to me what I said? A constructivist view, however, considers what ends those facts will be used. And I talk a lot with students when I talk to them about writing, about the way writing works, what writing does, rather than some of the surface issues that they perhaps are more commonly or more familiar with from previous educational experiences. So the writing process provides one of the best ways to help students learn active dialogic thinking skills valued in academic life. Thesis-governed writing evolves from the lengthy and messy process of drafting and redrafting. Writing as a process encourages the messy process whereby writers become engaged with a problem and once engaged, formulate, develop, complicate, and clarify their own ideas. So we don't often compare writing to wrestling, but we should. The goal of dialogic thinking skills is to identify the tension between multiple views and to wrestle with difficult problems. By wrestling with complex issues through writing, students are challenged to think more deeply about their subject matter than if they merely had to memorize and report. So I'm really pushing for us to think differently about the process that students use writing for, the purposes for which they use the process of writing for, rather than just the end result, the document that they produce at the end. So what exactly do we mean by the writing process? I throw that term around a lot, and it's easy to make the assumption that we're all talking about the same thing. But I don't want us to misunderstand that when I speak of writing as a process, I'm not talking about that lockstep, first we do this, then we do this, and then we do this. A lot of times we, whether it's English teachers or non-English teachers, have them do the outline, and then the next step they write the introduction, and then they write the body, and then they write the conclusion. That's not the writing process, and that's not an authentic way in which to do writing. It's actually very difficult for most writers to write in that order. Certainly we want it to end up that way, but to write it in that way is just not the way we think. Again, there's a connection between thinking and writing. So when we talk about the process, what we are actually talking about is something that is recursive. In reality, it's not linear, but it is a process of working through ideas and going back and forth to figure out how best to express a particular idea. Writing is both a process of doing critical thinking and a product that communicates the results of that critical thinking. I have so many times sat with students who are trying to correct some grammatical error, and I say to them, well, what do you mean here? What is it that you're trying to say? And they have a difficulty shifting between the rule of grammar that they're violating and the point of the sentence that they have put on paper. And I'm trying to get them to pull back from that because they have been conditioned. I don't blame them. They have been conditioned to think about those surface errors first and foremost. But if they are not understanding what it is that they're trying to say, those surface errors and how to fix them will always be something that is challenging and difficult. And so it's really about not putting the cart before the horse. Good writing actually begins with chaos. Thoughts don't typically come to us in order, right? How often do we see students' thesis coming clear by the end of their paper? Forget that. How often do we ourselves get to what it is we're trying to say by the end of that email or by the end of that report? Yeah, all the time, because we figure it out in the process of putting it down. So let's remember that when we're dealing with our students' papers as well, and help them understand the recursiveness of the writing process. We also need to make revision a part of the assignments that we give them so that they can understand what exactly revision is. Most of the time when we hear that word, and when our students hear that word, they think editing. They think about all the surface things that they need to go back and clean up, putting the periods in the right place and dotting all the I's and crossing all the T's. But in reality, revision means looking again. And what we're looking at are those bigger issues, those higher order concerns. Am I making myself clear? Have I considered the context? Are my points being adequately developed? Is this piece of writing serving the purpose for which it was intended? And so it looks at the function of the thesis compared to the body and considers the rhetorical situation. That's what we actually mean by revision. Too often we have mistakenly substituted the rich creative source of ideas for sterile order that leaves us obsessed with correctness, neatness, and propriety. The message from our schools has often been that writing is a joyless activity, an opportunity mainly for displaying errors for teachers to red pencil. That's a quote from Bean from the text that I'm using for this presentation. I think it is very telling and very true. So what kinds of assignments actually will help our students to think? Assignments that generate critical thinking are those that push students to actually take part in the recursive writing process. They are not going to do it on their own necessarily, particularly when they're not skilled at writing. We who write often sort of have our own process that we do, and we take it for granted. We don't really think about it. So we have to sort of put assignments in place that will force students to go through that process that doesn't come so naturally. NSSE and WPA research shows that the number of writing assignments in a course may not be as important as the design of the writing assignments themselves, so quality over quantity. In yesterday's workshop, we were introduced to RAFT and TIP, which stands for, RAFT stands for role, audience. Well, role is what it is that we're going to ask the students to do. Basically, it's the purpose, right? Are they informing? Are they persuading? Are they clarifying? These overriding purposes will drive a lot of what they do. And then giving them authentic audiences to think about something that would be relevant in real life, right? We're supposed to be preparing them for that. They're not always going to be in college. So helping them to visualize an audience, and that audience's stance towards the subject helps them to really understand the purpose of that writing a little better. One thing that we're going to talk about in just a moment is a technique that helps them to position themselves in relation to others, perhaps within the field or within that particular context, using language like many people think X, but I'm going to argue Y, where they're sort of positioning themselves in relation to another point of view, which makes them think differently about what they're saying. And then the F stands for format or genre. So the academic paper, the op-ed, the memo, the proposal, the experimental report, whatever the genre is will also dictate a lot of what they do and what should be included or left out. The assignment helps transfer earlier genre knowledge to the current task and helps them to really think about the way skills can be transferable in different ways, right? So that you're doing the same writing process perhaps, but you make certain changes depending on the format or the audience or the task that's laid out before you. The task sets forth the subject matter dimension of the assignment. For thesis-driven essays requiring disciplinary ways of thinking and arguing, tasks are best presented as disciplinary problems that the teacher provides. So there's a way that you can help them in this process by giving them enough information that they can then work with and work from. And this problem solution dichotomy is really the way to get them thinking. Intriguing, beautiful, or important problems and authentic tasks will challenge students to grapple with ideas, rethink their assumptions, and examine their mental modes of reality. If writing is only communication, the only question we can ask is it clear? But if writing is process and product of critical thinking, we can ask, is the writing interesting? Does it show a mind actively engaged with a problem? Does it bring something new to readers? Does it make an argument? Does it do something? So we're asking deeper questions when we ask of them to do more in their writing than just regurgitate information. Experienced writers begin by posing two kinds of problems, subject matter and rhetorical. We figure out what we want to say and for what purpose and in what context. The key to designing then effective assignments is to develop good problems for students to think about, and good problems are those that align with disciplinary problems broadly or course objectives specifically. The kinds of questions you develop should also be appropriate for their level of expertise. I've heard many professors say, oh, I'm teaching this grad class, I'm assuming my students already know this, and how to do that and how the other. But we can sometimes be disappointed by what they are actually not able to do. McDonald's has, not McDonald's the restaurant, but there's a theorist whose last name is McDonald, has laid out 4 stages of student development as writers. And I think we should think about that when we are, setting up our expectations of them. First of all, they are non-academic, they do non-academic writing, basically what they come with from high school. Who knows what that looks like, right? Then there's the generalized academic writing that they get from their freshman comp courses. And I've had many professors say, oh, they should know how to do this because they took freshman comp. No, freshman comp is just the very foundation, some basic general understanding of how to use language and how to develop, how to incorporate research But then the next step is the novice approximations of particular disciplinary ways of making knowledge. And that's really where they come to you all in your particular disciplines, and they have to learn how writing operates in that particular area. And they are very early in that process. They are very much having to learn what that looks like and how that compares to perhaps what they did in their freshman comp courses or what they've done all through grade school and high school. And then at some point we want to move them to that expert insider prose, where in their advanced courses they are really approximating the work of experts in that particular field. But the question becomes, how do we move them in that direction? But it's also how we talk to them about what it is that they are doing. So yes, you've just come from high school and now you're learning some of the general expectations of academic writing. That's your freshman comp course. But then we also need to talk to them as they get into their disciplines, that now that you've done some of the basic writing in your freshman comp course, let's talk about how some of those skills can translate into this particular discipline and the ways in which we use writing in this field, and teaching them some of the jargon and the terms and the genres that are specific to that field, and coming up with assignments that will help them to practice those things so that they can move from novice to expert status, right? Now, we also need to consider the complexity that is needed, the complexity of skills that is needed when we ask them to do research. And I think a lot of what we can do when we are helping them move from novice to expert in our fields is to consider all the things that are required and how we might be able to break those things down for students so that it's not so overwhelming. Rather than just, hey, write this research paper and turn it in at the end of the semester, let's consider that when we ask them to do research, we're asking them to do a number of things. They have to ask discipline-appropriate research questions. They have to establish a rhetorical context and have an understanding of their audience, the genre, and the purpose. They have to know how to find sources and why to find sources. There's a huge misconception we talked yesterday about students' idea of research writing or research papers, and it's like, oh, I'm gonna go find some stuff in the library, right? But what do they really understand about those sources and what they should be doing with them, right? What are they looking for specifically? And when students come in here asking of us help with their research writing, I often ask them, well, how many articles have you read? And they're like, oh, let me see what I can find. You know, there's just like an afterthought. Oh yeah, let me stick some stuff in here. So it's a more complex process that I don't know that they fully appreciate. And so perhaps we need to take a step back and help them with some of that. Then the integration of those sources into the paper, the way in which you actually bring in those ideas, and it has a lot to do with their thinking about those sources as people within a field, within a discipline, rather than just some words on a page they have to figure out how to work into their paper, right? They have to know how to take thoughtful notes and how to cite and document. Now, the problem with this list is that they need to know how to do all of these things. But when they have a research paper assignment, they come in and say, hey, I need help on knowing how to cite APA. They skip 1 through 6. I just need to know how to do it. It's APA. My teacher wants me to do APA. Can you help me with APA? And we're looking at their APA and we're like, okay, yes, we can show you how to do your cover page, but do you want to talk about your lit review real quick? It's completely lost on them. So, okay, that's not supposed to look like that. What is going on? I'm missing some letters. Wow, okay. That's weird. I don't know what's going on. Anyway, we need to help them understand the significance of the work that they're doing. And that needs to have some high stakes. I think something about high stakes. Assignments that, something about, yeah. I'm missing some letters. I don't remember how I worded my title there. But propose a proposition. So these are some suggestions for what we can have them do. Propose a proposition or thesis for students to defend or refute. Give students a problem or question that demands students' best solution answer. Assign a thesis-governed paper requiring analysis of raw data. right? So we can give them certain things rather than send them, send them to sink or swim, give them smaller assignments that are more focused basically on the parts of the research process that they need to master and understand more deeply. And this one I think is really great because in assigning them a thesis governed paper requiring analysis of raw data, we could give them the raw data, talk about what you're supposed, how to read and interpret data, and then have them develop a position in relation to the data that they then have to analyze once they understand what exactly that is and how that works. And that is a crucial skill that they will need when they do any kind of research writing. Create summary response assignments based on one or more scholarly articles. So yesterday we talked about helping them understand how to read deeply, how to slow down their reading process, how to use various strategies for reading complex texts. And then, that can be a great assignment to give them. Okay, read this scholarly article now that we've talked about how to absorb it, get your dictionary out and make sure you're taking good notes. And then write a summary of that author's main point and respond to it. What do you think about that perspective? Give them some background and context for that particular theorist, right? This is a person in the field who aligns with this particular way of thinking about the problems within our discipline. So look at what he has presented in this particular article and respond to that based on what we've talked about in class. Something like that. And it's a small assignment, but one that would be really useful in teaching them some key skills. I don't know what's going on with my thing here, but I have a handout I would like to give you, the BIZIPS beam, not that one, BIZIP, yes. And I love this.
Dr. Wilk,
yes.
The slide right before this one, you listed just potential assignments that we can use?
Yes.
All right, good.
Yes. Yes.
Thank you.
Yeah, since our title was kind of messed up there. Say again. I don't know. Reconceptualize research. Yes. Okay, so what I love about Beam's chart here is that when we teach students about research writing, we often talk to them about primary and secondary sources. But what Beam has done is actually broken that down a little more so that we can talk to students about, so this is the part about helping them understand what to do with the sources they find, helping them understand the ways in which sources, the different ways that sources function in our research. So certain sources operate as background information for a topic or subject. Other sources might come under the category of evidence. Other types of sources help with the argument. It's about the conversation of critical views and relevant scholarship surrounding a question. And then there are references to the theories or methods the writer is employing, sometimes implicit, but often explicit. So when we talk to our students about sources, I don't know that they always fully appreciate what that exactly means. And then we say, oh, you can have primary sources, you can have secondary sources. That's really still very broad and sometimes a little wieldy for students to fully grasp. But if we break it down into these categories, I think it helps them to say, oh, it helps them to think about what they find in a very specific way. So, okay, these sets of articles or these sources that I found would work well to help provide background information. That way, when I'm incorporating that information into my paper, I'm doing so for the purpose of giving background on the topic that I'm writing on. Whereas this other information, maybe it's data or observations or visual images, is evidence in support of something that I'm discussing. These other types of sources are actually arguing from a particular perspective, and so I want to engage with them in a particular way. And so maybe having them kind of going through a chart like this and talking to them about what those sources might look like in your particular discipline, giving some tangible examples, would help them to sort of get, oh, okay, when I go to that database and start looking for articles, I'm not just looking for stuff on my topic. I'm looking for people who are talking about this subject in a particular way that will actually help me to incorporate them strategically and purposefully, not just randomly, which is typically how it goes. that should say other ways to incorporate writing. I suggest separating writing assignments into two categories, high stakes and low stakes. So every writing assignment doesn't have to be a big one, doesn't have to be a research paper, right? So this also speaks to the concern about how much time I spend in my class talking about writing or giving writing assignments. Incorporating writing into your daily class meetings and your discussions of content can be very useful in helping students think more deeply about that subject matter. So low stakes assignments are those that allow them to explore and externalize their thoughts. That includes journal writing, drafting, homework questions where they have to respond with more than 2 words, a few sentences, discussion board posts, small group tasks, bell ringers or starters for class discussion. I used to have students come read something and then bring 3 discussion questions to class for us to talk about. Class debates, panels, and fish bowls, and then practice exam questions. And I was like, fish bowls? Do you all know what a fish bowl is? I had never heard of it, but it is fantastic. I wish I had known when I was teaching. It's such a great idea. It's a way to organize your class discussions so that a few students and maybe even some faculty, if you can have some come in, form a circle in the middle of the class, and the rest of the class is sort of like a big town hall type thing for you, and you turn your classroom into a town hall. But you have sort of a small circle of individuals discussing a topic or problem, and the rest of the class becomes the audience, and they surround the group that's in the middle. And there's sort of moderated questions or whatever that they discuss during a period of time, and then those who are listening are taking notes and thinking of questions that they might add or comments that they might add to the conversation, and then at some point you open it up to the rest of the class. And I just love the idea of that sort of unique engagement, particularly if you have a combination of students and professors in the fishbowl discussing a particular subject and then bringing the rest of the class to chime in. Such a great idea. So it's another way to help them sort of engage and think deeply about whatever the subject is. And so, if you divide your courses into your assignments rather into high stakes and low stakes, then those high stakes assignments might simply be an essay exam or a research paper. But whatever the low stakes assignments are, they might lead up to those higher stakes assignments so that everything connects and builds on one another and leads to a particular end. So don't let the students off the hook. When you start having them think, they will resist. When given a critical thinking problem, students tend to reach closure too quickly. They do not suspend judgment, question assumptions, evaluate evidence, imagine alternative answers, play with data, enter into the spirit of opposing views, and just plain linger over questions. As a result, they often write truncated and underdeveloped papers. I think you said yesterday, a lot of the comments that you make is say more, right? They don't say enough about the subject matter. So give students time for exploration and reflection. Those low stakes activities is the opportunity to really make them engage. When you get students arguing with one another, you can get a wealth of they really start to think then when they have to defend their perspective against an opposing view. So aim for reflective tasks that encourage students to think metacognitively about their own thinking processes, to connect learning in one course to other courses or to their own lives, to transfer skills from one setting to another, and to integrate their learning. Don't allow them to skip past a statement or a comment. Come back to it and say, well, why do you say that? What experiences have you had that lead you to that conclusion? I don't know, I was just raised that way. Well, think about the way you were raised and why it is that your parents taught you that, right? Force them to look at it and think through it, which they often don't want to do. Well, that's my opinion. I'm entitled to my opinion. Yes, but your opinion comes from somewhere. Where does it come from? How did you get to that conclusion? Right? Force them to take a moment and think through those ideas that they hold, and don't let them off the hook. No, I didn't. I don't think I had a title on this one. Okay, neither we nor our students need to think too narrowly about writing either. Help them understand that it doesn't end after freshman comp. I've had many students in here saying, I'm just trying to get through this freshman comp class so I can get this writing stuff over with. I'm like, sorry to tell you, it's not going away. Students need to learn how different disciplines use evidence to support arguments. Some disciplines derive their evidence from observation of natural or cultural phenomena, sometimes converted to numbers, subjected to statistical analysis, and displayed in graphs and tables. Other disciplines use qualitative data for ethnographic observation, focus group transcripts, or interviews. Still others analyze oral, visual, or verbal text housed in libraries, historical archives, art galleries, museums, etc. So it's really about helping them to understand that the writing doesn't go away, it just changes. But in every discipline, there is a way in which certain perspectives are put forth and defended or supported, and that what is used is just what changes. So they need to see how different kinds of data function as evidence in support of a claim. All right, so with that in mind, the map there is a good way to sort of see the comparison. I'll take one, two. Of the different disciplines. The chart that's coming around, I may have given this out yesterday, I'm not sure. In the left-hand column, it talks about the meta-discipline of problem solving, empirical inquiry, interpretive or theoretical stance, and performance. And then in the next category is the explanation. So disciplinary professionals use disciplinary knowledge and procedures to solve real-world problems for a targeted client. Typical disciplines are business, engineering, applied economics, agriculture, some sub-disciplines in the social sciences. The ways of doing in those areas might be finance professional proposes better way to forecast future value of a new product. That is a lot of syllables that are tying my tongue. Engineering team designs a lighter battery with a faster recharging time. The meta genre is practical proposal to solve a problem. Related genres would be the memo, technical report, feasibility studies, white paper, management plan, technical documentation, funding proposal. Actually, if we just stayed in the related genres and read all the way down, all the different forms that writing takes for different disciplines, students would quickly see that regardless of their major, there's likely some type of document that they will need to put together. And the function of it is sort of explained here as far as empirical inquiry, interpretive or theoretical stance, and the performance of that information. Okay, concerns about integrating writing. That's what that's supposed to say. It's like, all right, so one of the concerns about integrating writing, oh, I know what I wanted to do before we got to this point. Since we were talking about, can I see this handout? Yeah. Well, I want to back up for a minute because I think I skipped one of the other handouts I wanted to give you. When I was talking, yeah, pass this one out. When we were talking about activities that you could give to students to help them do all this deep thinking and critical analysis that we were talking about, there is an example coming around of an assignment that is worded, there's two different wordings for it. We want to make sure, again, the whole point is when I was giving the chart of the students' progression in terms of skill and how there's a lot of times that they have to sort of figure out, and as much as possible, if we can provide smaller assignments to lead them to those larger ones. We also want to think narrowly and very focused when we give those types of assignments. And so the example that you have there is sort of a right way and a wrong way to do that, because sometimes we get excited and we're like, oh, and think about this, and think about this, and think about this, and do this, and make sure you consider this. in one assignment, right? And so if we remember that we need to kind of move them slowly through that process, we want to simplify and really narrowly focus them on a particular task so that they are not overwhelmed or try to do too many things. So I want you to take a moment, if you would, just to read the first assignment, the wording for that particular assignment, and then compare it to the revision of that. And let's talk about the difference in the way that it is presented. Anybody still reading? So what is the difference between these two assignments? It's the same assignment basically, but how are they different? How so?
Just lots of, I guess lots of thoughts and lots of questions, but not really getting into what they're supposed to do.
So how was that fixed in the second one?
Like choose a position, choose a side, and debate it. I like that because you are allowing students to think outside the box, opposed to giving the students an option. Do you agree or disagree with that? You become more critical thinking.
Right. Right. They're not all let off the hook. Do you agree or disagree is no, I don't agree. That's it. There's not an invitation to engage more deeply. Yeah. And then also, well, did you notice anything else? I mean, not.
I noticed also says you may want to do some research.
Right.
Or not. I mean, they're gonna say no.
Right. What student's gonna be like, oh, I'm going to a library. Right. And what is it like? What is that? You can or you cannot. It's up to you. Like, right. What is the teacher actually asking me to do? Because then students will say, well, he didn't say I need to do research, but then he told me when I turned my paper in that I should have done research. If you want me to do research, say it, right? But also, like you may want to do some research. Like, have we talked about research? Is there a way to, do they understand the process of, if you're going to mention something like that, you really want to make sure that you all are thinking the same thing about what that would entail, right? As I've had students come in and they're like, yeah, he just said to find some sources. I was like, well, did he say what kind of sources or where they should come from? Nope. No information about the process. They come to us asking, looking at us, and we're like, well, I can't read your teacher's mind, but based on what you're showing me, let's try to move you in a direction. Yeah. Ms. Walker Parker, did you have something else?
No, I'm just gonna say, the first one is a lot of information that's really not necessary.
It feels like a brain dump. It feels like the professor's like, oh, and what else you could talk about? And oh, and there's also this, and then there's also, think about this. And what he says in the book is that students will sometimes just take each one of those questions and just try to answer those questions, right? I'm just trying to give my teacher what she wants without really thinking through the ideas, which the second one does a better job of asking them to really respond. The other one I'd like to share with you, another way to get them thinking, I've mentioned it before and then I skipped past it, I apologize. This is an exercise that incorporates, let's see, Krishandra, give them that one first, not that one, the other one. The assignment that the student would get. Yeah, that's front and back, right? Yeah. Okay, so what's coming around is an assignment that I created, which is a merging of the Nosich critical from Gerald Nosich SEI for critical thinking. I don't know how familiar you all are with learning to think things through. So critical thinking text by Gerald Nosich, in which he talks to us about how to clarify our meaning. And he uses what's called SEEI, which is state, elaborate, exemplify, and illustrate. I'm gonna have you turn the handout that you have to this side. I'm gonna talk you through this one first, and then I'll explain. The other part of this assignment comes from a book, the Graff and Birchfield, I think, are the authors, called They Say, I Say. And what that book talks about is how to teach students the moves that professionals, scholars make in their writing as a way to position their point of view in relation to other points of view. So I've basically taken the Nosich critical thinking exercise of SEEI, and I've merged that with the Graff and Birchfield, I gotta find that book, so I'm brutalizing their names, I apologize. Templates for helping students make those moves that writers make. I've combined them in this exercise. So what I do is have them read some article, not usually a really complex one, something that they can grasp quickly. And they are to read for understanding, as I tell them here in step 1. And then they are to take notes on it and sort of get some sense of what the main points are. And then I want them to sort of summarize and respond to that text, right? So step 2 is, do you agree, do you disagree, or do you agree with some different perspective? And that's where the moves that writers make comes in. That's where I'm trying to get them to sort of think about how their perspective on that topic compares to others or compares to the author that they have just read. When they begin their response, as I have on step 3, they utilize the template that's on the back of this page, and then they use the SEEI strategy to elaborate on that. So if you turn to the back, there are 3 ways, I tell them, there are 3 ways that you can respond to what someone has said. Fully agree, you can fully disagree, or you might agree with certain things and disagree with others. Now, to keep them from saying, oh, I agree for all the reasons that the author said, I ask them to consider one of these ways to agree, right? Which requires them to think about their reason for agreeing and provide their own reasoning and rationale for their agreement with that author. So if they were to use the first sentence, and I tell them this is just a template, which you manipulate however your own wording would require, and you would say, I agree that, and then you would summarize whatever the author said in the article you read. And your reason is because my experience with something confirms it. And at that point, you would need to explain whatever that experience was that led you to your agreement. Or they might choose another one where they disagree, for example, and they might use the third or the fourth bullet point. This author contradicts herself or can't have it both ways. On one hand, she argues this. What are they required to do at that point? Summarize the author's argument, right? They need to have grasped what the author was arguing and then explain how she contradicts herself, and then position their response, which says that, you know, there's a whole different way of looking at it. And then they agree with a difference is where, although I agree with this author up to a point, I cannot accept her overriding assumption that. Now we got to understand what an assumption is. Or there's another one that talks about concept. I don't agree with this author's concept of blah, blah, blah. Now we're going to have a conversation about what is a concept, right? Those are some abstract ideas that would require some deep thinking in order to respond to. And then after they kind of get that initial response, well, I agree because my experience confirms it, then I say, okay, but I want you to say more, right? I don't want you just to stop with a couple of sentences in terms of why you agree or disagree. And that's where the second handout comes in about the state, elaborate, exemplify, and illustrate. So basically that is asking them, after you've made your statement about what you agree with or disagree with, say more about that statement. Say, you know, in other words, right? You say it in a different way to make it even clearer. And then I say, add to that an example. If your experience confirms it, give us an example from your experience that illustrates what you're saying about that position. And then to further deepen the point, providing an illustration, which is a comparison between your statement and something that is similar to it. And so what I do is usually say, you know, the illustration's a little harder because that's sort of using a metaphor, such and such is like, you know, or something. So a lot of times the exemplify and illustrate becomes difficult. They're much more adept at providing an example of a particular thing. But either way, if I get them thinking through those steps of positioning themselves in relation to the author that they've just read, explaining what it is that they believe the author is saying in comparison to what they believe, and then elaborating on that, even if they don't get all the way through the acronym SEEI, they tend to find that there's so much more that they can say, and they are forced to really think about what they're responding to in a much deeper way. So it has proved to be a very useful tool. Let me skip to the end. I'm not going to keep you all over like I did yesterday. If I can get my slides to cooperate. Here we go. So I want to just, with everything that we have discussed now, I want to go back to this one. So the idea that incorporating writing into your course might take away from the content, I think, as we can see, is not something that should be a concern, right? Choose quality over quantity. No one says that you need to, when you're not a writing teacher, that you need to incorporate writing with every assignment, but there are strategic ways that you can utilize writing to actually support the content of your course. Consider also that in the long run, learning how to learn will be more beneficial than just learning how to do something. So, you know, in the course of a semester, there's probably limited things that you can actually get to. I talked yesterday about prioritizing and then making sure that our students have the tools to learn whatever else there is to learn, right? And not feeling like we have to cover it all in a semester. If you're in a discipline that you feel is unsuitable for your course, consider or reconsider your concept of writing. And as I said before, we're not necessarily just talking about research papers or even summary responses. We can also look at those low stakes assignments in which writing is used in smaller ways that help to support the content. Align writing tasks with metacognitive or procedural aims. Another concern is I'll be buried in papers. My response is plan your courses to include what you can handle, right? You don't have to read or grade everything they write either. A lot of times we assume that everything we give them has to be graded, and they don't have to know that you're not going to grade it, right? So you don't tell them that's not graded. You just say, hey, I want you to write this, and then the exercise of doing it because they're afraid they, you know, if they don't, they won't get the points, or, you know, give them points for doing it, even if you're not necessarily reading it. The exercises that you give them, the writing exercises that you give them are important enough that if they even come close to doing them, it will benefit them. And then the idea that because you're in a particular discipline that is not English, you're not knowledgeable. Remember that the goal is to teach students how to think. Respond to student writing with an eye towards writing as a process, and think about your own process and what you do to revise, then offer that kind of feedback to students. You all have to write in one way or another, and you know what is needed in order to facilitate whatever the writing is, and so use your own experience to give feedback to them. By giving low-stakes writing assignments that you can comment on in regards to content and form, you are helping them understand expectations and process and forcing them to think about understanding the subject matter, not just communicating and regurgitating information. So you don't have to know all the grammar rules. That's the point. You don't have to know all the grammar rules in order to incorporate writing in your course. And then, of course, you always have us. Right? Partner with us, allow us to provide the resources that maybe you don't have as it relates to writing in some way. We can give you feedback on your course design, on your writing assignments. We can let you know what your students are struggling with when they do come in, the kinds of questions they're asking about the kinds of writing you're requiring of them. We can help your students understand that writing is a process, and we can provide resources and workshops on those grammatical things that we want them to work on. But I said yesterday, we need to remember that that's going to be an ongoing thing that writers, all of us, have to work on. And so if we explain to our students that that's ongoing, you have a problem with comma splices or some subject-verb agreement, it's really about them getting those resources to help themselves and make sure that they are working on it throughout their tenure, not just in your class, but throughout their time, really as lifelong learners. And so we are happy to provide those resources for you. Ariana, if you could give them all that survey before they go real quick. And if you have any questions or if there's anything else that we can help you with, we certainly would like to do so. And I really appreciate all of you for coming. And I actually got you out of here before 1 o'clock, so yay me. Are there any questions before we get out of here?